Hi there, this is Becky from Nomadic Knits, and today we are getting ready to unpick this provisional cast on from the beginning of our 12 Days of Knitmas Mystery Knit Along project. So I am just going to walk through that with you in case this is your first time doing this. So you'll remember that when we cast on, we left more stitches on one side than the other. The side that had the more stitches is the one that we are going to unpick from, because the other side was made with our slip knot. So this is the side that we want to unpick. And you simply pull that apart, and you can see that it easily comes undone. Now, before I get ahead of myself here, I want to mention that if you used a stickier yarn, like that had a higher wool content, it may have felted a little, so you may have to tug on it here and there, and that's fine. Don't worry about that. Also, because we were working with Surrey Silk or mohair, and it was pretty close to our provisional cast on, some of those fibers could have gotten wrapped around it. So you might have to disentangle that just a little bit as you go. Just take your time. And don't be afraid to, snip at it a little bit if you need to, if you have a tiny pair of snips, because what can happen is it can just get felted around it. Just be really careful not to snip any stitches. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and pick this up. And there are two ways that you can pick up a provisional cast on. The first is that you can just go ahead and pull this provisional cast on right out. And I would recommend that instead of doing it that way, and you might have to for this first stitch, unwind it like this. Instead of doing that, I would suggest picking them up as you go, instead of unwinding that whole cast on and then picking them up after the fact. It is just easier to do it. Well, I shouldn't say easier. It is less risky to do it this way. So we're just going to continue on picking these stitches up as we go. And you can see that I'm using the provisional cast on to pull the stitch up and make it more easily visible. And as you work your way around, you'll find what works best for you. And you can see that guy almost got away from me. So if you put your lifeline in at the beginning of your project, it makes this process a little less worrisome, because you don't have to be concerned about dropping your stitches, because that lifeline is going to hold them right in place. So while we are right here, and I only have a few stitches on this needle, and we're talking about lifelines, I'm going to quickly show you another option, because if at this very moment you're saying, oh no, I wish I had a lifeline, it's not too late. And I'm going to show you one way to do it, which if you watched yesterday's video, you may have already seen. But I'm just going to take some rayon thread that I have on hand. It's nice and slippery, and it's not going to get stuck in my stitches. And because I'm using a needle that has this nice little hole in it right here, I'm just going to thread the rayon right through there. And I pulled a pretty long tail through here so that it doesn't come out of the needle as I go around. But now, as I'm picking up the stitches, I'm also inserting a lifeline. So it gives us another little piece of added security, especially if the Kitchener stitch is new to you, if you're new to grafting pieces of your work together. That will just ensure that your stitches stay where they need to be. Okay, so we are reaching the end of our provisional cast on here, and you can see that this last little guy, he sort of got squashed a little bit and has gotten pulled down into the work. Now, this one I could easily get onto the needle, but because for our actual project we're working in fingering, if you need to, you can just take your tapestry needle or your seam needle, whatever you're going to use, and you can use that to place it on your needle if any of those stitches at the end are tight. And then you can pull your thread through here, your provisional cast on yarn. And now you have all of your stitches on your needle. And you can see we also have this thread hanging out here. So we want to pull this needle the rest of the way through so that we can pull our lifeline through and secure that. So I'm just going to tie these ends together. So now we have a lifeline that's all set. I'm going to trim that guy up because you'll see once we get going that it can be nice not to have too much loose yarn or thread hanging around because it can be a little distracting as we're going to have a few other things going on. So now if you didn't have the type of needle where you were able to pull a lifeline through and you're concerned and would like to insert one, you can simply take your tapestry needle and thread that through those stitches right now. So our next step is to put this set of stitches back on the needles as well. Because I've got this set of stitches on our stitch saver cord, this should be really easy. Just going to untie this knot. I'm going to grab the correct size needle. So we want to have your gauge needle, whatever size needle you got gauge in and knit the majority of your shawl in. That's what you want to be using for this Kitchener graft. So I have my proper needle size and I'm going to pick up those stitches, but I'm also going to show you an option right now. So I'm using interchangeable needles, and an option if you're using an interchangeable needle is to just use one point. This might be helpful if you only have one set of needle tips in the size that you've been working with. So I will show you how that works as we approach the end of this. Sorry about that. So just like we did when we were pulling this stitch saver through, we're going to firmly push it onto the end of our knitting needle. And we'll pull this through there. Do our best not to tangle up our lifeline. I'm going to pull this stitch marker out of here for now, and then we can talk about that more in just a few minutes. So now I'm just going to slide those stitches onto my knitting needle. I feel like now is a good time to mention that if you are using interchangeable needles, be sure that you have snugged them up. Use your key, tighten them up nice and tight, because having your join come loose while you are doing this work is no fun. Now that all of our stitches are on needles and ready to be grafted, we need to make sure that these needles are going to be in alignment. And since we are working a Moebius cowl, it means that there needs to be a twist. So when we insert the twist, you can see that those needles are no longer lined up. And this is a really easy fix. So what you want to do is just pull out this back needle. Well, it depends on what kind of needles that you're using and your cord length, but you're just going to slip half of the stitches over to this side. Okay, so for the cowl, there are 100 stitches in total. So you're going to go ahead and slip 50 stitches over. Okay. Now that you have switched those stitches over, you can see that if you fold your work up flat, that your needles are facing in the opposite direction. And that's exactly what we want. So before we take this next step, I want you to take a good look at your stitches and be sure that they are all mounted properly, which means that you want the right leg of your stitch in the forward position. If that is not how your stitches look, it's very possible that they were twisted as you were picking up your stitches from your provisional cast on, or that they somehow just got twisted as you were shuffling them around during this process. It's not a big deal at all. Just cycle through them and get them untwisted before we start. This is also a great time to confirm that you have woven in your ends as completely as you would like them to be woven in. You'll notice that I don't have any loose yarn here at the beginning of rounds. Everything has been tidied up how I would like it to be. So this piece is ready to go. So now if you fold your piece up again and you twist it, you are lined up to graft. And I want to talk about needle management for a moment here. You might have noticed that I switched this bottom needle to a longer cord. That's so that I can get rid of this needle if I so choose and replace it with a stopper and just let that needle hang. If I don't have a stopper, I can also just pull this needle and let it hang down because we aren't using that needle as we join these two in the Kitchener graft. This back needle on this portion of your cowl and this front would-be needle and this portion of your cowl aren't used. Get that out of the way so that you can better see this. So you simply want to get them out of the way because these are the needles that we are going to be working with. Now, if you had a needle on this end and it was on a shorter cord, or for whatever reason, it just needed to be where it is, right here. I'm going to show you another option for keeping, sorry, just trying to find my yarn key or my needle key, for keeping your stitches safe and intact and keeping that needle out of your way. I'll just toss on this other needle so I can show you what I'm talking about. So now we have 4 needles, front and back and front and back. this back needle and this front needle aren't needed. So we basically just want to make sure that the stitches are going to stay put and not come off of there as we're working around this project. So you can cap them with some stitch protectors. You can use one of these guys to keep them together and out of the way. I just saw somebody share a great idea where what they did was they just pulled the needle and stuck it into the work to kind of keep it out of the way. And they did it with both of them. So this is creating some loops for me, but I'm sure that you could play around with that and get them out of your way. But however you choose to do this, if it doesn't bother you to have those needles sitting there while you're working, then that's absolutely fine as well. But my preference is just to have them out of the way. So I'm going to quickly switch them back over to how I prefer to work with them, and then we'll go from there. Now that we have put the twist in our project and lined our needles up, our next step is to place a couple of markers. And you're going to want to use removable markers for this. I like these little guys. They seem to work well. And you're going to put one marker on this first stitch. It's on this needle. And you're going to put a second marker on the first stitch on this back needle. And these are going to help us out as we complete the Kitchener stitch. So you don't have to worry about them at all now that you have them placed. They're just going to hang out there until we get to the end of our Kitchener stitch. And so this is the back needle that you'll be working from. This is the first stitch you'll be working into on this back needle, and this is the first stitch that you'll be working into on the front needle. Now we're going to take this tail that we've been saving and thread it onto our tapestry needle. I like to leave a long enough tail so I don't have to worry about it pulling more loose as I'm stitching. And this tapestry needle has now become our working needle. These two are just holding our stitches, and we're doing all the work with this. And the Kitchener stitch is a series of 4 stitches that are repeated over and over again. So when I say this to myself in my head, I say knit, purl, purl, knit. If you've ever done the Kitchener stitch before and you've done it flat, you'll know that there are some setup stitches. Because we're working this in the round, there are no setup stitches. So we jump right in with our knit, purl, purl, knit. And the way that it works is that you are going to knit the first stitch on your front needle. So you're slipping that thread through there knitwise and sliding it off of the needle. This thread will get much easier to manage as we continue on. Our second stitch is a purl. So you're going through the second stitch on the front needle purlwise. and you are leaving it on the needle. And now we are going to purl the first stitch on the back needle, and drop it off the end. And we're going to knit the second stitch on the back needle and leave it on the needle. So the series goes knit, drop it off, purl, leave it on, purl, drop it off, knit, leave it on. And this is all written out in your directions for you to refer to. But it might be helpful for you to get into some kind of rhythm that helps you remember the knit, purl, purl, knit while rotating from the front to the back. So we just did a knit and dropped it off, and a purl, and we're going to leave it on, a purl, drop it off, and a knit and leave it on. And as we're working this, you want to try and keep even tension throughout on this stockinette stitch that you're forming underneath here. But the good news is that if it seems a little bit loose at the end, you will be able to snug that up. And if it is too tight, you can do the opposite. As long as you haven't woven in this tail end yet, you will be able to adjust that. So another way to ensure that you aren't missing any stitches is to do the needles in one step at a time. So you knit and purl in one step. And this is how I generally do it. And then the same for the back. Purl and knit. And you are just going to continue this, knit, purl, until you've reached the last two stitches. Purl, knit. All right, as you can see, I am just about finished up here. So we're just going to work these last stitches. Continuing on with our knit, purl, purl, knit pattern. And now that we only have these two stitches left on our needles, this is when these marked stitches come into play. These stitches that we marked before we started our Kitchener stitching. And they are going to function as the last two stitches as if they were on our needle so that we can finish up this pattern that we've been working. So you can see that this would be what is coming from this needle, and we're going to knit this lower one as if it was coming from this needle. So we're going to continue on in this pattern that we've been knitting. So we're going to knit, and we can get rid of this needle, and then we're going to use this stitch right here. Get this guy out of the way, and we will purl. And then we'll come up here and purl this stitch and get rid of that needle. And then we will knit this last stitch. And you have now completed your Kitchener graft. At this point, you can take a look at your stitches, at your Kitchener graft here, and see if you need to even them out at all. If anything needs to be snugged up or loosened up. If it does, you can, simply pull this back down in if you need to loosen things up. And if you need to tighten things up, just the opposite. And if you find you have a loose spot back a ways, it might take a little bit for you to work your way through it, but it is completely possible to even those stitches out so that you have a completely invisible join. This is a really useful technique in a lot of different situations. I hope that you enjoyed learning something new. And now to finish this up, to weave your ends in, you're simply, or your end, you just have this one end, you're going to duplicate stitch. So you'll simply do a duplicate stitch, and once you've done, maybe an inch or so of those duplicate stitches, you're going to push your needle in. We'll say that, if it was right here, you would push your needle in. And cut your tail shorter than where you're going to pull it out, and pull it all the way through, and that way you're just tucking your yarn to the inside of your work. Once your ends are woven in and you're ready to get rid of this lifeline, you can simply snip it. And begin tugging it out through the front of your work. There, now you have an even better idea of how seamless that join is. If this was your first time attempting the Kitchener stitch, I just want to say congratulations. It can be a little daunting. It has a reputation as being finicky and a little bit challenging, but I'm hoping that you saw that it is just a matter of repetition and taking your time, and it will get easier. Every time that you do it, it gets a little bit easier, and I'm just really excited that you took a chance and that you went for it. Thank you so much for being here, and Merry Knitmas.